Hey guys, Sharpen here. In this video I'm going to show you how you can incorporate microtonal gamelan sounds into full beats. The beat that we're going to be working with sounds like this. So, in this part of the Gamelan pluck tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can incorporate these microtonal sounds into full normal sounding beats. So, the first thing I did in order to create the beat that you've just heard is choose a scale. And I chose the C minor scale, and then I took a bass sound, which is this one, and I just told it to play the root note of the scale, which is C. Then I just took the patch that we made in the previous tutorial and I just improvised some melody in the C minor scale on top of it. So as you can hear, it definitely sounds microtonal, and basically what I did is I mostly used the C minor pentatonic scale in order to create more consonant intervals so that it doesn't sound way too dissonant. So after you have an improv, what you need to do is to record it and then chop it up. So what I did is I chopped it up, just some parts from the normal improv, and then I also added on top the reversed improv, which I just reversed the sample for, and I also added some delay on top so that it sounds something like this. As you can see, it has some delay and some other effects that we'll get into in a second. So together I got this sound. Which is a bit more interesting, and then I added some effects to both of these. So for the reversed one, I've added some EQ that cuts out the low end and the bass. I've added some OTT to add some high-end content. I've added some dimension expanding, and then I also added some delay. I've sent the reversed one to a long reverb bus, which has reverb of 7.5 seconds on 100% wet, and an EQ that cuts out the low end as well. And then for the regular improv, which is this one, I've added the same OTT. I've added some room reverb, but just a tiny bit, and another EQ to cut out the bass frequencies. And I also sent it to a long reverb bus, so altogether we get a very ambient sound. And then the next thing I did was just render it out, so I got this sound. And then I started to build a beat around it. So basically we are at the C minor scale, so I chose to add an 808 that is in the C minor scale. It sounds something like this. So as you can hear, once you add an element that is tonal and very strong, like a bass instrument, you can sort of control the microtonal shifts that are happening in your gamelan sound. The bass is just very dominant and strong, so that it sort of keeps the key center where it's at, and it doesn't let the gamelan let it drift away too far, if that makes sense. So in addition to that, I've decided to also add a very nice massive X patch. It's fairly simple. I just wanted some movement, so I played a chord with it. It's just the C minor chord, but I'm not playing the root note, I'm not playing the third, and instead of the third I'm playing the fourth, which is F. I'm also playing the seventh, which makes it a C minor seventh. So it sounds like this. Basically, the whole point of this patch is just to have a low pass filter that is moving around, which creates this sort of moving sound. And then I'm also using the same LFO to modulate the pitch of an anima effect, so it also creates some moving sound. And then I'm adding an unclear noise in the noise oscillator, and I'm modulating it using the same LFO and also another LFO. One of these are at a free rate, and the other one is synced to the tempo of the song. So that creates an evolving movement all of the time. And as you can hear, that noise adds some nice sound to it, nice texture. It makes it sound a bit more organic. And then on top of that, I've also added a three voices unison, some chorus, but not too much. And that is pretty much it for this sound. So once you play chords with it, it gets to sound really like it's moving all of the time. I've added some pancake on top of it so that it goes from one ear to the other all of the time, and I've added some whole reverb. It's at around 20% mix. Okay, so together with our gamelan loop, it should sound like this. Again, this is also here to sort of stabilize the pitch of our whole track. So this is very stable tonal wise compared to the gamelan that is always slightly shifting. So together with the bass, you get a pretty strong bass for your track, so that the gamelan loop doesn't take it out of pitch very easily. Then, since we have very organic sounds, I've decided to add some forest ambience. You hear some birds and some crickets, and it adds some nice high end. And then I've added some drums. So for the drums, I've decided to go for a very sort of drunk feeling, because the gamelan loop isn't like synced to tempo, and it isn't played exactly to the beat. It's very like offbeat. So I've decided to do the same with a lot of kick drums everywhere pretty much. It sounds like this. As you can see, most of the kick drums aren't being played when the 808 hits. They are being played right after, like right here. And there's also a small tom sound that is also like leading to the kick drum. And altogether, this creates a slightly of a shuffle feeling to the beat, since you're not playing the kick drum on the very like dominant spots, like at the first beat and at the right here at the half of the second beat before the snare. You're doing it a bit more complex, which is way more interesting in my opinion. Then I added a small bell loop that I found. It sounds something like this. I've added it because the texture reminds me of the gamelan sample, but it adds a rhythmic center that is also always the same. It's always constant and doesn't change compared to the gamelan loop. So again, this helps contextualize our track both rhythmically, while, for example, the 808 helps contextualize it tonally, because the gamelan loop is out of key, slightly out of key, and also slightly offbeat. So altogether, so far we have this sound, which is basically most of the beat. And then for the second half that it's repeating, I've decided to also add a short melody. I've loaded up a massive preset. It's of a pizzicato strings. It sounds like this. And basically this short up melody is also there to stabilize our track melodically, so that we can hear a lot of elements that are in key compared to the gamelan loop. So altogether we have this sound. And then in order to transition to the next part of the beat, I've chopped up the gamelan loop so that we get a stuttery sound. I've basically just removed every other sample here in a very fast rate. And then I've added a frequency shifter to the gamelan loop, to the massive X synth, and to the pizzicato strings, so that it basically pitch shifts the whole sound of it down by a tiny bit, so it sort of sounds like a tape stop, which helps bring us back to the beginning of the loop all over again. It sort of makes it hit a bit harder when you have some silence from the tape stop. And I've also decided to stop the 808 right here, and I've added a very short sample of a bass fill. It sounds like this. And it sort of gives us a short break from the very heavy bass sound of the 808. Like that. So altogether with the frequency shifting and all of the melodic sounds, you get this effect. Then when the loop repeats, I've decided to completely change it. So I took the gamelan improvisation loop and I've reversed it, so we get this one. But the thing is that when you reverse a loop that has reverb, then all of the reverb sort of fades away when the notes are changing. Here's an example. You can hear how every time the notes change, it's pretty abrupt compared to the original loop. So in order to fix that, I've routed it again to the long reverb bus a second time after I've reversed it, so that we get a smoother transition. Like that. Now at the second part, I've also decided to add some hi-hats. So we have a ride sample that sounds like this. It's a very simple loop. Just quarter notes. It sounds like this. And we have some basic trap hi-hats. These ones, and they're playing at sort of slow speeds and then very fast speeds. And as you can see, I've played with the velocity a bit to keep it a bit more interesting. And I've also went to the effects section and I've added some pancakes so that it goes from one ear to the other all of the time. Some dimension expanding so that they sound slightly wider, and also some flangers so that again they sound a bit wider. Here's how they sound without all of the effects, which is very dry, but this beat is already very wet, so I went for a more wider sound, which is this one. So the beat altogether sounds like this. And with the bells it sounds like this. And then once you add everything, all of the melodic content, it should sound something like this. And then I also wanted to highlight how you can use these microtonal gamelan sounds in breakdowns and not in just parts that are hard hitting. So I've made a short intro, and basically the intro started with just the bass note that we had from the improvisation, and I've added some effects on top of the bass. I've added some amp simulation and some chorus. So the chorus just adds some movement. Here's how it sounds without it. It barely moves, so I've added some chorus so that it does move a bit more. And I've modulated it so that as we progress through the breakdown, the dry knob in the chorus goes down and the depth of the chorus goes up, so that we get a more phasey sound and a less bass sounding. So it turns into something that has some less high-end, low-end content, which is just great because we need a short break from bass before the hard-hitting part starts playing, so that we get a harder hard-hitting part. So altogether we also have the bells, and what I did is I added 2 automation clips. So basically what we have here is that the bells are being fed into this mixer track, and basically what happens is that in this mixer track I'm increasing the mix of the reverb and the length of the reverb. So let's see that. So basically what I'm doing is fading the bells in the reverb, so that at the beginning they sound very dominant, but then they sort of start to fade and sound in the back of the track. And the same thing happens for our Massive X synth. And you can see that the notes here are different. I've used the same chord that I use in the hard hitting part, but I've decided to add more notes, and I've decided to do notes that are in the scale but are very close to each other, so that we get some dissonant parts, and that the further we get to the end of the breakdown, we get very dissonant notes. So here are some of the notes, and here we get a very dissonant part. And basically the closer we get to the hard-hitting part of the beat, I've decided to create the most dissonance, so we can feel like a build of tension and then release of the tension as the beat hits. So altogether it sort of washes away with the reverb. And the same thing happens for the gamelan loop and the bells. And then we have a sub bass drop right here. So basically it's there just to sort of fill in the empty space. Here's how it sounds like. And then I just took a very short sample of the reversed gamelan loop, and I just added a frequency shifter on it as well, so we can also sort of create a tape stop effect. So it's very subtle, and it sort of goes down exactly as the beat is about to hit. And just before the beat hits, I took a short drum sample, reversed it, and added a volume automation so that it sort of fades into the kick of the first beat. And I've also reversed the kick and did the same thing so that it sort of like feels like a whoosh effect right into the beat. And that is pretty much it for that beat. I hope you liked that video, and if you have any questions about how I made a certain thing in this beat, or how to incorporate the gamelan sounds into other ideas, please let me know, and I'll try to answer all of these. If you found this tutorial helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and let me know in the comments below what subject you want me to cover up next time.